There we go. Thank you.
Okay. Apparently the microphone's over there, so I normally walk around when I talk, but I'm not allowed to. I've got to stay here. So I'm going to feel all confined. But I had to do a lot of reading around this because I realized that when you start looking at teaching, you have to do a whole lot of stuff and a whole lot of preparation, and I felt thoroughly, completely underprepared. I mean, I'm doing it, but I don't know why I'm doing it. So I had to really think about it beforehand. So I'm feeling my way a little bit here, and I hope you will indulge me in certain things. There's one aspect that I shouldn't really talk about, but I really, really want to. I wanted to ask you to think about the word Timbuktu and what it means to you, and what your perceptions around the word Timbuktu are. Just for a minute. I had to do a project for my son, and I had to do a project for my son. I had to, actually I bloody did. Anyway, I had to help him with a history project, and it was on Timbuktu. And I had the absolute classic version in my head of what Timbuktu is, which is that it is, and this was actually confirmed by interviewing 250 people from America and the EU. It is a metaphor for a mysterious and distant place, and it is a mythical idea, and that actually it's a bit of a joke. You sort of say, oh, you're off to Timbuktu, like, are you going on this stupid journey to nowhere? And actually, when I started reading about Timbuktu, I realized that it was anything but a joke. It was the center of the African Saharan trade routes for a very, very long time. It's been listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It has a population of 55,000. It was the intellectual and spiritual capital and center of propagation of Islam throughout Africa in the 15th and 16th centuries. It has 3 huge mosques. I can't pronounce their names. And these they've tried to preserve them to recall Timbuktu's golden age. It founded in the 5th century. The apogee of Timbuktu came during the 15th and 16th century. There were 180 Quranic schools and 25,000 students, and the city had 100,000 inhabitants, and it was the commercial, spiritual, and cultural center of the trans-Saharan trading routes. So it was an extremely important historical site. It is an extremely important historical site, and there are thousands and thousands of extremely important Islamic manuscripts that have been preserved there. So for me, that was a huge wake-up call, and I thought to myself, you know what, I am so flippin' colonized. And I started thinking about, well, I've been thinking for a while around what I can actually do, what we can do to reimagine and decolonize our curricula. But first of all, I just wanted to talk a little bit about why we should think about reimagining our curricula. And the first is to think about a definition for a curriculum. So it assigns value. A curriculum assigns value. What do we think is important and valuable, and what do we not think is important and valuable? For example, if you asked a lot of doctors, how do you feel about studying pharmaceutical and drugs? And you ask them, how do you feel about your grandmother's cures for various things? You would get a completely different reaction around those two ideas. The other thing is that the curriculum determines the academic formation for new discussion and new academics and the new generation. So it's very, very important in determining how people think about a subject in a particular way going forward. So the idea of a curriculum is not a simple one. It's not a flippant thing. If we think about higher education, the world is changing rapidly. So from around the back of World War II, where enrollment in higher education was about 4 to 5% across the world. In 2012 in the US, the latest statistic that I had was that 66% of people have been through or have enrolled or are in the process of enrolling or have had experience of higher education. That is a massive figure. So higher education has actually shifted from being an elite privilege to being a mass model which focuses on the transmission of skills that are useful to a large group of students. And now it's becoming what Trow calls the universal model. So it is adapting an entire population to rapid social and technological change. So it's a big ask. And one of the things that's happening is that the diversity as a result of so many more people becoming part of it is that the diversity, obviously the diversity of the student group is changing. So the gender is changing, the age is changing, the experience, the ethnicity, everything is changing. And so obviously higher education has to keep up. And if you actually look at even a simple thing like a Barbie doll, nowadays, that's the old version of a Barbie doll. Nowadays, Barbie comes in a whole range of different sizes and shapes and colors. And I just thought that even though I never played with Barbie dolls myself, it is a wonderful thing that we are not restricted to the skinny thing, and that we actually have a range now of different types and versions. They're all, well, no, apparently the one in the blue dress is supposed to be a plus size. She's plus size, the one in the middle. Mm-hmm. What I love, though, very, very, very quickly aside, is that when they brought out the latest Star Wars toys, the head, the main character in the movie is a girl, and she wasn't included in the range of Star Wars toys. Only the male toys were included. Yeah. So it's time to include alternative viewpoints. And I did some reading around this, and there's a lot of very interesting stuff. There's an some Australian authors called McLaughlin and Watman, who, working in the Indigenous context within Australia, have looked really quite critically at what's happening in terms of Indigenous knowledge in Australia. And they actually started their paper by thanking the Aboriginal people or Indigenous people whose land the university that they were built on, the university that they were talking at was built on. So insights have emerged, especially in the quite recently, in the last half century, 25 years, and debates are really, really happening specifically in our country at the moment. A very nice paper by Spania on looking at the science curriculum and gender in science curricula says that a diverse curriculum will include histories and contributions of different groups and constructively utilize differences in values, interests, and experiences. So I reconstructed my talk from what it was originally, and I've decided to put an example in straight away, and to look at different viewpoints from the point of view of the enology curriculum. So how are we looking at incorporating alternative histories and alternative ideas into our course? One of the things that I did was I read a really, really wonderful book by the late Jake Skirwell and Jean Veal and Wilmot James, which explores an alternative version of the South African wine industry. Very, 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 very interesting. And what I did was I took a chapter out of it, and I asked students to read it and review it and reflect on it. And they did, and they wrote their reflections. Very uncomfortable, don't like writing reflections, but it's a fabulous tool. And I'm not going to read all of these, I'm just going to highlight a little bit. The feedback that we got was quite wonderful. Ek het nog altyd geweet slawe het 'n belangrike rol in die geskiedenis gespeel, maar ek het nooit besef hoe vital hulle werk was nie. Ons leer altyd van die groot name in die wynbedryf, maar dis min wat mens werklik iets hoor oor die slawe en hulle werklike rol. Daar was 'n slaaf die keldermeester by Constantia tussen, I'm not going to say that in Afrikaans, it's too complicated, it's got all backwards things in, 1759 to 1778, that is nearly 20 years, and they do not know his identity, his name. Then there's, the other things is the problems faced by the residents of the Cape in the 17th and 18th century resonate strongly within our culture today. Hundreds of years on, we still experience the effects of colonialism, slavery, and questionable labor practices. The focus of this exercise was also to look at winemaking. But these comments came out in addition when the students realized what actually the alternative history was. So moving on with why we need to reimagine our curricula, because we don't have an awful lot of time, is we need to acknowledge our history. We need to acknowledge our problems. We need to just not pretend that they're not there. So 60% of Black African students survive the first year, but only 15% graduate the killing fields, as Chetty calls it. And then social inequalities are embedded in all our spheres of life. And I can tell you, I said HE is no exception, but the wine industry, and HE has developed along Western epistemologies of knowledge, so we're going to have very Western structures in place, and it's a big talking point about the structures of HE at the moment. And then Chetty singles us out. He says that HE is a class struggle, and that Stellenbosch University and Pretoria are conservative Afrikaans institutions where the voices of the thinkers have been discouraged and repressed or co-opted by university bureaucracy and unashamedly drive a neoliberal agenda and colorblindness. So that's something to think about. But he also says that the student protests that have happened are a really, really positive factor. I think we all agree with that the student protests that specifically last year, I actually captured this image from my office. It was wonderful. And he says that academics can't abdicate responsibility anymore. We can't just carry on like before. We have to actually think about these things and do something about it. So if I take another example from Enology, where I think about acknowledging the issues, what we do in Enology 244 is we give them a theme to investigate in groups, and then they have to present to the class. They have to outline the issue. They have to investigate its history and obviously use references wherever they can. Investigate its impact, where they look at what's happening in society. They have about 2 weeks to do this, and they do it in groups. And then they need to tell the class, after doing that, exactly what the wine industry is doing about this specific issue. And then they must produce an individual report where once again they need to reflect. So the issues that we cover are the effect of alcohol and wine on communities, and I tell them a couple of examples that I've got, and then looking at the DOP system and the effect of that, looking at fetal alcohol syndrome, looking at conditions of farm workers, and looking at the environmental effects of spray programs, which are absolutely horrific. So it's not all, I just wanted to go back to this picture. This is actually of the living quarters of farm workers on a wine farm. That was taken about 5 years ago. I think thankfully things have changed. They were expected to live in a toilet. They had been working on the farm for 20 years and they lived in a toilet. So, I mean, some of it's not easy for the students to confront, and I love that aspect of it. Struggle is good. So fetal alcohol syndrome is also really, really eye-opening in the Western Cape. It's hectic. Right, another reason why we need to reimagine our curricula is because if we do, and we incorporate other stuff, we try and call on the backgrounds and try and as far as we possibly can, and that is not easy sometimes, is to think about where they're coming from, their experiences, because learning is so much easier when you have something to build on. So one of the things that I do really try and do is to explore how I can manipulate the space to make it as accessible as possible. So one of the some of the examples that, oh, by the way, proud, us proud. Guess who that is there? Faith Pinach. She came through our program. So Enology 142 and with our community engagement partners, we have reimagined completely our sensory training, and we have actually started off. Wine is a very, very Eurocentric, a massively Eurocentric subject with massively Eurocentric descriptors associated with it, with wine. And students are just expected to know what box tree and yew and elderflower and violets smell like. And of course they don't. They don't have a clue. So what we do is we've incorporated pictures as well, because sometimes the descriptors are not always clear whereas a picture is much more easily accessible and they can relate to it far more easily. So we include South African smells that might be related to wine. Obviously we're a bit restricted, but things like curry and coffee and leather and pineapple and chocolate and mint, guava, things that pawpaw, mango, things that they're very familiar with, that are part of South African, are every single South African's background aroma noise, if you like. And then gradually we build them up to the traditional wine descriptors like asparagus and violets and box tree and blackcurrant and blackberry. I mean, how are they supposed to be able to separate? I can't even do it. Separate between blackcurrant and blackberry and youngberry and all these things that don't grow naturally in our environment. So that is something that we're really enjoying doing, and we're actually doing research in that at the moment. And then we try to address different learning styles as well in terms of diversity. So we use a variety of assessments. We try and I use a creative designing wine label. We get the students to design wine labels that have to be compliant with South African legislation, and then they have a chance to kind of express themselves and get themselves into groups and come up with alternative designs and new stuff that they can think about. We do a massive service learning thing in second year where they go out into the trade and they interact with consumers. I use reflection as much as I possibly can, and one of the things that I would say is if you are going to do off-campus visits and practicals, make it credit bearing. Make everything credit bearing. And then the students actually, it's very sad, but they do take it a lot more seriously when they know that they are going to get marks for it. So they're not just standing around in a winery looking at a machine, but they have to actually, come up with something to reflect on, to think about, to critically evaluate about the visit. I included this because I am a scientist, and because I'm actually not as proud of being a scientist as I was before I started doing this research. But science is a very, very tough customer to decolonize, because science thinks it's perfect. And science says that there is a method and you follow the method. But actually, there are as many methods as there are scientists. And as there are hundreds of thousands of subjects, I think it's Heard who said that actually there are as many methodologies in science as there are, and there are as many opinions and different ways of doing things, and every single scientist is going to have a slightly different way, which is completely humanist and actually is completely against what science says it is. So science and technology have been cited as extremely important in shaping the future, but there's actually extremely little literature on transformation in science, because it holds itself up to be perfect. So what Heard calls the intellectual straitjacket and nostalgia of science, where nature and the data are seen as paramount. and where nothing can argue with that. And actually, if you start looking at it, it's extremely... Spanier's paper was amazing. She actually analyzes and pulls out examples from her own experience and from all sorts of other writers, and she looks at science really critically. It's just the most wonderful paper. So, you know, the educational context in science is this revered hierarchy that goes back. You're standing on the shoulders of giants. You know, there's no wiggle room. You can only look down. And it is a very, very, very difficult space to reimagine and to rework with. I'm not going to look at this, but what I am going to, or not going to concentrate too long on this, but what I am going to read out is that science holds itself up to be value neutral, but actually the large scale and competitive values of scientific structures have promoted more purposeful scientific fraud than any of us ever imagined. And justifying, there's a lot of justifying undeserved differentials of power. And if you look at it, it is really, really, really quite interesting, but there's not a lot to look at. It's, if I had the time, I think that this is something that I would love to explore a whole lot more. So how do we go about reimagining a scientific curriculum? What do we do about this hierarchical, you know, straitjacket that we have to work with? There's a nice paper by Garuba who says that what you need to do is ask fundamental questions about place, perspective, and orientation. So where did the information come from? How did this actually develop? And explore critical alternatives. So think about things in different ways. I mean, obviously all of you come from completely different backgrounds, so it's going to be, you're going to have your own pot to work with of various things, and it is just really about taking chances and doing experiments. And I like this picture of Einstein, a person who never made a mistake, never tried anything new. Actually try stuff. And I always tell the students, I'm trying this. I'm going to try something. You are my lab rats for this particular experiment, and let's see what happens. If I'm doing formal research, then I will go through the ethical clearance process. But in the classroom, I do play around, and I let the students know that I'm playing around. And I ask them, what did you think of that? Did you enjoy it? Was it fun? Was it horrible? And they're quite, one of them actually wrote in the thing, why must we be used as experimental animals for Ms. Mackay's experiments? It's not fair. So I don't always get positive feedback about it, but the vast majority of them are tolerant and patient with me and actually kind of engage with the process quite nicely. Garuba also talked about, and this is a little bit, I actually feel like I'm doing the first one. But that is the way that I can do it. That's the way that I can feel my way forward. So he was discussing something called the Nairobi debate, where you have a content-driven additive approach, where you expand the curriculum gradually and in little steps, and you change things gradually, which is what I'm doing. It's what I feel comfortable doing. It's not necessarily the ethically correct way of taking things forward, but it's the only way that I can do it at the moment. We are recurriculating in 2016, 2017, and I'm hoping to be able to make some stern advances up against my scientific colleagues, but I'm hoping to not just add raffia chairs to the master's living room, but to actually think, the other thing is to think about how the subject is constituted. What tools are used to study it, what concepts are used to frame the subject, and what language is used to speak it. That's really important, is what are the words that you're using. It was actually such a wake-up call to me when quite a few years ago, one of the students just said to me, but what is box tree? What is it? And I said to myself, it's sort of a bit like linden flower. And then they said, oh. So, and I was like, okie dokie. So yeah, it really actually think about what the words that you're using in the way that you teach, because you may be marginalizing students without even realizing it. Just using the words that you use every single day in your subjects may be, those words may be totally meaningless, and it might be as simple as finding an alternative word and then coming back to the normal word. McLaughlin and Watman in their Australian paper said, start by recognizing the absence of Indigenous perspectives. Start by generating conversations. Actually ask the students how they feel about it. What is totally unfamiliar? How would they like it if you tried something different? Janssen, strong, simple, consistent messages, and absolutely key is that no prejudice and bigotry. And then create a classroom culture that genuinely respects difference and diversity. I make myself, whenever I talk about winemakers, say she first and he second. And I know that that's actually kind of almost reverse discrimination, but because everybody talks about winemakers as he, and there's so many winemakers now that are she, I just thought I'm going to start talking about she first and see what happens. We've actually got a 50-50 split in our class now between male and female students. When I started out in enology, it was 100% male. So it's very nice. The other thing is to ask the students what their names are, because the name that you might see on their class list is not necessarily the name. I know that you're supposed to, it's supposed to say what the student prefers to be called, but I've actually definitely found that the English name for black students is used, and actually they call themselves, I mean, we have a student who is known as Charles generally in the environment, but his name is actually Huitze, and he calls himself Huitze with his friends, and so that is just a tiny little thing, but it can actually make such a difference if you take the trouble to actually ask what people prefer to be called. And that goes for the Afrikaans students as well, because I was calling somebody Johannes for a very long time until he finally said to me, actually, I prefer to be called Jacob. So it's not just you know, that, yes. Anyway, I did do some reading, and I have papers here if anyone's interested, and Cecilia is going to give you some papers as well. So, and like I said, I'm really not actually an expert. I'm just feeling my way forward, taking baby steps. So yes, I'd love to hear other people's ideas as well.
Thank you very much. Making their baby steps, but they're very brave, they're very grand baby steps, in my opinion. And that's probably one of the reasons why Marianne is our class and distinguished teacher award winner last year, and why she's been some of one of our newest distinguished university teaching fellows. And you can see why she has those accolades. So a hearty congratulations on both those accounts as well. All right, we'd like to open it up to questions now. And any questions, comments, or contribute to the conversation that Marianne has raised with us this afternoon? Everybody can jump in.
I'm trying to think of where I could put similar initiatives in the engineering curriculum. But maybe to start, what is the what's on the study guide for ionology one, whatever, where you start doing these things? What is the purpose of that class? What are they meant to do?
The ones where I've made the most changes were in the second year, which were the trade modules. So there was a much more human orientation to it. It was South African wine industry, global issues, bits and pieces. So I had a lot more flexibility in Enology 214 and 244, but we have actually brought stuff into the 478 modules, and I've brought in alternative assessments now into 314 as well. But it's a very, very good point where you do have a curriculum that is rigid and you have 700 students. You're not going to have the flexibility. I mean, we've only got 30, we've got 43 in second year. So it's not a massive number, and I do completely acknowledge that when you're dealing with very large classes, there are going to be things that you cannot do. You can, though, with that history one, where the stuff that came out from the students from their reflections was actually about slaves. That is a winemaking. It's looking at how they were making wine. So it's actually a technical assessment, but in their reflections that aspect came out. Yeah, but, I mean, the winemaking was horrific, and it's really interesting what they did. But what interested me the most was how they, I mean, mixing goat's blood and lovely stuff. The students love it. But the alternative, that stuff, the decolonization stuff, was what really grabbed me. But I just gotta let your mind go, and
yeah, I mean, the subjects that I lecture are purely technical. There's no learning. It's application, it's all application based. But I'm just wondering, usually with the engineers, that the place where they possibly would be space for that would be in their professional communication course and in their philosophy ethics course. But out of 4 years, there were 2 6-month courses. That's the only touch and egg. I don't like it.
I know. It is something that also comes. I mean, what I found was the more I did it, the more I did it. You know what I mean? Is that as you start thinking, ooh, and then it kind of, it's just letting your mind be open. And even if you don't do it for 5 years, because you never think of an opportunity, just keeping your mind open to the fact that there might be something that you could include. A different example, African examples of stuff, instead of the old boring. I mean, wine can be really boring because it's all just France, and I just yeah, I'm more able to. I have more flexibility, but I still think keeping an open mind means that you will one day something will just go, oh my goodness gracious me, and it's such fun to think about as well.
Maybe I know you in engineering, and this, once you was talking this, image came back to me. Homo sapiens and machinery. I mean, we always talk that the developed world are sometimes faultless until you have this tragedy in Germany. So you can seldom remove humanity from the machine. And I think for the Germans, it's almost also a wake-up call in the sense that how can this stupid train accident happen on German soil? Because we're so used to it, I think, in the developing country, and we say, look, they're not, it's extended as tragedies to happen there. So yeah, it's again to play with those ideas as how we treat the knowledge and also in the spaces that we use.
Well,
there's no doubt in my mind that there is overlap between engineering and society, and it's something that's driven by the engineering councils throughout the world. But it is resisted by the academic environment.
Absolutely.
Bringing into the curriculum, because the curriculum is so full of technical stuff. And so the view is fine, have one formula that deals with the index of how this comes in, but 1 plus 1 equals 2, 2 plus 2 equals 4, that's what you really need to teach your students. So we don't do any reading, we don't do any reflection, we don't do any discussion in our classes. It's not that it's minimal, it is not. In fact, the first time that they have to do anything that constitutes reading is in the final year for the research project, and it's, if you get 3 pages on literature review, I'll get engineering. They don't write. They don't discuss. They don't debate. They do.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed this. It's something I've been thinking about for a while now. Trying to, what do I keep my class? Yes. I stopped an engineering classes. I teach engineers introductory biology. And I stopped this morning because I didn't know what I'm teaching you right now. I think what you're teaching you is wrong. So I think the stop this class will try me next week. Because I do think what we're teaching is wrong. I think we teach content. That's what we teach. That's not what we are, that's not what we're supposed to deliver. And so I have this constant clash of what I'm supposed to teach in terms of content and in terms of in 18 months you need to find a job. So my first question was, when you put the slides on, I said that I don't have slides. What about notes? You never write a text next week and let's see how much you know. Complete pandemonium. Because how much is it going to count? You know?
Yep, no, I know.
So we have discussions as far as I know. We had a discussion the other day about cloning. They love to clone themselves. I said the first person who can bring me a page of motivation on why you should be, as an individual, there should be 2 of you. We can try cloning you.
I can give you 10 pages on why there should be 3 of me.
Because of me. I said, well, what do you bring to this? So sometimes I say, what's your value? What do you bring? And you think about this, and they don't like it. And I think we should push up. So my question is, how do you convince your colleagues that this is important? And this is actually not important, this is vital. If we don't do this, we're going to lose a generation of thinkers. Because it's not that it's not important. Your colleagues will agree that it's important. It's the prioritization. It's just on a scale. Yeah, it's important that there's no space to it.
I'm not even sure that they do think that it's important, honestly. I get told regularly that I'm fluffy and fuzzy. And I must, do proper science. And I do proper science. But the other stuff my colleagues don't, I'm not acknowledged, except in a particular sphere. So it's a real tough one, but there are opportunities. I actually just thought when you were talking now, I have to teach legislation in the trade modules, and I have to teach about disaster management within a thing. And I actually used an example of the South African workers, a report going out in 2012, I think it was, in Norway, about the plight of South African workers. I think I had the blue, and it went out, and I said, right, we're going to look at this from a disaster management point of view, and we're going to look at containment, and we're going to look at it not from a physical, it's happening in physical space. We're going to talk about it in, this is a disaster for the wine industry. What do we do about it? It's an absolute PR nightmare. What are we doing about it? So it honestly is just about kind of finding little things that you can do. And that's why I say I'm actually not that brave, because I'm not like reworking the entire thing. I'm just taking little tiny little, like I'm wiggling to try and make things different and to make them think about things in a different way, in a different perspective. And yeah, it's science. Whew.
So, just a quick follow-up is
it'll come back.
I could give you a quick paragraph. Hierdie begin van decolonization. as ons dink aan die roads was vol veld of by sluit jy dit in byvoorbeeld in decolonization?
Yes, I think I do.
As 'n baie
Yeah.
breë begrip.
Yeah. As a broader picture, that is part of it. Rhodes was a nasty piece of work. I mean, he did some good things like setting up the Rhodes Scholarship and all the rest of it. But basically, he was a nasty piece of work.
Ja, as ons net my vraag klaar vra oor daai ding.
Ja.
Ons erken dat Rhodes het verskriklike goed gedoen. En ons verstaan, maar ons kan nie ontken dat Rhodes 'n geweldige invloed gehad het op die Suid-Afrikaanse ontwikkeling. So om dit te gaan uitskry soos 'n stuk kanker uit ons verlede uit, beteken dat ons die visie, kom ons vat Hitler, verskriklike, die grootste monster seker wat bekendheid verwerf het in die land, miskien nie die grootste monster in die wêreld, maar die grootste bekendheid op berigtheid. Maar jy kan hom nie uitsny, want as jy hom uitsny, dan verloor jy wat jy geleer het uit. Dit wat my besorg oor wat jy my nou sê, dat jy moet Rhodes uitsny.
No, you mustn't.
So dis die een ding, decolonization. Die ander ding wat ek wil iets wil sê is, baie die ingenieursfakulteit hoekom het julle nie 'n creative thinking klas? Hoekom het julle nie 'n kunstklas byvoorbeeld as deel van die kurrikulum? Waar studente moet kuns bedryf, maak nie saak hoe goed of sleg dit is. Dit gaan nie daaroor dat hulle dan op 'n alternatiewe of 'n ander manier moet dink as dood eenvoudig een en een is 2 en ek sit hierdie boutjie daar.
In ons fakulteit geval om te besluit dat fisieke eerste jaar fakultees of binne in ander fakultees en graad 8 gebiede of 12 gebiede wees waar daar 4 gebiede moet. Washington verhouding ieders inkom vir alternatiewe klasse en ons het dan reeds ons 4 gebiede en daar is nie dat iets anders. En ons sit 4 ure elke jaar in bespreek. So daar is, en dis nie net Stellenbosch, dis elke ingenieursfakulteit waar dit was in Amerika, in Duitsland, in Suid-Afrika, hulle kry nie plek vir die tegnologie wat ons in die wêreld het. Die kennis, die tegniese kennis wat ingenieurs moet hê om in die wêreld te gaan werk, is so breed dat en ek sê nie saam nie, want wat is reg, maar die teen argument is, daar is net nie plek vir daardie goed. Hulle praat nou om wat 5 jaar kursus te maak, maar daar is nie plek vir 3 jaar. Vir al die tegniese goed wat gedoen.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay, I'd like to be running out of time, so I'm going to do my hand, but it's like to do 2 more people an opportunity.
Actually, I want to just mention 2 more things. One more thing. Penguin Random House, talking about critical thinking. Penguin Random House are no longer requiring a degree because they're looking at diversifying their editors. So then they don't feel that a degree gives necessarily the diversification and the creative thinking, and that is a real threat to what we're doing. We need to address that. Otherwise, we're going to die as institutions. So we really need to think about that. And the Rhodes thing, I would never recommend cutting out. What needs to happen is I think it was Syed, one of the papers that I looked at, talked about contrapuntal viewing. So actually, like in music where you have a counterpoint, what he says is you balance. So you talk about Rhodes and you say how important he was and you say what he achieved and what he did and how he shaped history. But then you also say, but however, these other people also did the same thing, and in fact Rhodes. So you talk about it from both, and that of course means you need more space in the curriculum. You need more time to talk about it. So it's really tough.
I'm from the languages, and I think I might have the privilege of doing this stuff and really enjoying the diversity. But to come back to the baby's question, I think simply deciding on, for instance, I'm not sure it's going to work for you though, defining something a bit more broadly. Because,
For instance, previously, we started off at the language center, the students should know about active and passive voice. So my colleagues decided they would like to teach active and passive voice. What I'm trying to do is I'm applying, but then I define, write down an experiment in the passive voice. I define that experiment really wide. So anything can be an experiment. My question is, and I really enjoy it because I get 130 different experiments. But now my colleagues, of course, that is really hard to grade. So they tell me, man, what are you getting marks for? How are you doing this stuff? And I find I really need to manage this process the whole time with my colleagues. I need to reassure them. I need to tell them, yes, this is indeed an experiment, although you may not think so, and so forth. And it's lots of hard work. It's much harder work than this is the experiment and you all do it exactly the same way. This used to be really easy to mark though, but now we have 130 different experiments because it can be an experiment doing something else. I just want to know, if your students come through your cooking program and you're the only one who can do this, can you measure the graduate, what you basically do is you're teaching graduate actions. Can you measure that they take those skills into some of the other courses as well, even though it's maybe not actively taught there? They think differently about the content that somebody else. Because that's what I always wonder about. When you teach something else, you look at the second semester, you see it.
The only thing that I haven't attempted to measure it. We do an internship in the 4th year, which we are in the process of trying to assess the success of it by asking industry. So we're asking, are our students different to how they were 4 years ago? And that's as far as we've got, because we instituted these trade modules 4 years ago, and we instituted the internship, the long internship 4 years ago. So we're asking the industry now, are you seeing a difference in the students? But I'm actually presenting on professionalism and employability in England in May, and we've got to do it before then. We've got to get out into industry and ask 100 people in industry how they feel, and we might get a no. We might get a, your students are as useless as they ever were. Our industry the whole doesn't take any prisoners. Yeah, no, I have not measured that. It would be an interesting thing to do.
Now it's the last burning questions. We'd just like to wrap up the conversation today anyway. I've told you the 2 readings that Marianne has brought along. Do you want to just introduce people to
I thought that this the Annexure 5, I thought it's actually it's really nicely written. It's not, I mean, I have got used to a certain amount of acronym and mumbo jumbo, but it's actually quite nicely and concisely written, just looking at the reasons why transformation is necessary. And they do actually have some ideas for thinking about transformation as well, and how we can include, I mean, the decolonization / transformation / reimagining are all words for basically introducing diversity and recognizing difference and trying to Africanize our curricula, which is a tough call. It's a tough call in some subjects. Oh, that one was, I took a quote out of the conversation one about Sue Ellen Shea, from Sue Ellen Shea, that said we just have to decolonize. But she, in this one, is actually talking about a 4-year degree rather than a 3-year degree. So her focus in this one is looking at why are we sticking to this idea of a 3-year degree, and surely we would get more value out of a 4 or a 5-year degree for engineering. I mean, we're already at a 4-year degree, so we've got a lot more wiggle room in agri-science than other faculties have. I think a 4-year degree is an excellent idea. I've got no issue with it whatsoever, except obviously the cost, but then that's a whole separate conversation.
I think there are many levels there. There are issues at the structural level, what a program looks like, issues around pedagogy, there are issues around what goes into the and how we approach it. I think there are various levels of conversation here. Of course, from the other side as well, the issues around the university as a space. We need to look at itself, and certainly Chetty is putting on a challenge to certain environment. Also needs to be looked itself as a higher education, a particular kind of education space. I think there are a number of conversations that we really need to have at this university. I think Graham has got us started. I'd just like to ask you whether you'd like to take a conversation we've started here today further. We've got you down a email addresses. We'd like to try and continue this conversation as we move forward. If you're interested in follow-ups,
could I ask who is working in science, particularly? Okay, because for me that was a very, very interesting thing that came out of this. Was just thinking about science. I mean, yeah, it's a yeah. But yeah.
Shall we do that? Shall we try and initiate a conversation out of this Auxin and we like those and go into something bigger? And certainly there's a need for this conversation to happen at this university. It's overdue. So it just remains for me to thank all of you for coming and for your participation and for helping us to shed light on this topic. To Marianne, of course, for the work she's done and for sharing it with us, and so you get a limited edition CTL mug. Thank you very much. And we will be in touch with you.
It's white.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you for coming. Hello. I hope I haven't been recording through the entire thing. Yes, of course.
One of a portion of the film is on the Afrocentric curriculum and African Renaissance.
Oh, okay, brilliant. Wow.
I was interested in that portion that was Africanized is one of the keywords that I use. The readings that they had, I came in late, so I was like,
that is my, yeah, no, we are trying, because we have a community engagement partner, the PYDA, who are all African, so we have to really think how to present our material and how to think about what their backgrounds are and how they do it.
The thing that I've been also reading that, and we're sort of displacing them coming here or divorcing them from what they know.
Absolutely.
And not just, I mean, like last time, the English would ever come here. And it's still like in that industrialized model where we do the content thing, but not really.
It's the hierarchical,
doing the lateral thinking.
You know, we have this thing, and this is how it's done, and this is how it's always been done, and you must just comply.
But even, as you say, you work in a study space. If you don't do art, or if you don't do like a musical instrument, it's very difficult to navigate science, because people who are musically inclined do better in science than just using the thinking realm instead of.
Because it's structured and analytical.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually love science. Slightly less than I did before. Before I started reading around it and realizing it's just so prescriptive. It's just, I mean, how dare they? You know what I mean? I started thinking, actually, how dare you? Which was the first time, because I've always held up science to be this shining example of human achievement and, you know, how things should be done. And it's rubbish.
But the thing with me is, also this idea that you have to have this set up from 8 till whenever, 8 till 3, 8 till 5. Because I don't function this time of the day. That
Yeah,
assumption
for
that
none of
learning
that-
only takes place in the class.
And in the day.
And
Yes,
during
yes.
the day.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, I have my aha moments between 1 and 4 in the morning. But thank you.
Thank you. I hope I've done everything.